of tradition has provided disturbing images and violent conflicts in vivid portrayal in Bible. He's saying it, not me. And he goes on to say that that gives fodder to extremists. So, dualism and struggle against evil. Same concept has influenced the Islamic teaching of jihad. Jihad. The jihad refers to inner struggle against evil within oneself and not a violent concept of declaration of war against other religion, says Islamic Supreme Council of America. It's an inner struggle. You have to fight against your own demons. You don't have to go out and kill somebody else because they don't believe in your faith. But the popular parlance of jihad is exactly the opposite. A concept of jihad of the sword. And on this topic, our ancestors have experienced it to an extent that one could call that a genocide. They have killed Zoroastrians like anything. Why? So did the following religions really take this concept and build on it? No. Failed. So then we go to secularism, where there is separation of religion and state. And I have to quote Zarathustra again, it says a righteous government is of all the most to be wished for. In fact, one translation by Ali Jafari says that he translates this into government by people, meaning a democratic government. And if he's right, maybe the concept of democracy was then present in the mind of Zarathustra. And what did Mahatma Gandhi say? If I were a dictator, religion and state would be separate. I swear by my religion, I will die for it. But it is my personal affair. The state has nothing to do with it. The state would look after your secular welfare, health, communication, foreign relations, currency, and so on, but not your or my religion. Separate them, he says. That's Mahatma Gandhi, promoting secular life. So Zarathustra's values of free will, accountability, responsibility forms the basis of representative government. Democratic governance, liberal secularism. So secular democracies have produced more human happiness and sense of justice than countries with state religion. So Zarathustra's teachings and philosophies were incorporated in successive religions, but secularism has brought them to practice. Zoroastrianism and Zarathustra's teachings are ancient, but the message is modern. The society that protects and promotes respect for individuals, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, equality of people, men and women are equal. Religious freedom. In a secular society, you are free to practice your religion. Try doing it in a country that has religious governance. Harmony between people. Good governance and fairness. Zarathustra's teachings being applied today in a secular society. So Zarathustra preached a way of life Ladies and gentlemen, old is the new new. Old is the new new. His teachings are timeless. Timeless. They are relevant today as they were some 3,500 years ago. Just that human took that long to realize it. So we as humans face a challenging future. Environmental issues, overpopulation, climate change, political tensions, and dwindling resources, as the young lady said so eloquently a couple of speakers ago. As we face these issues, let us look at Zarathustra's teachings and philosophy for guidance and most practical solutions. So may Ahura Mazda grant us the wisdom to appreciate and follow his teachings for the betterment of humanity. May humanity benefit from Zarathustra's teachings. Thank you. And I would like to remind you again of my disclaimer.
Anybody have any questions? Comments?
I actually have two questions. So my first question, I just want to hear your opinion as a practicing priest. So you mentioned that Zarathustra preached gender equality, that he made no distinction between men and women. But what are your thoughts on how that's actually practiced today in the Zoroastrian community? So specifically with regards to women who are menstruating, who aren't allowed in temples, women who marry outside of religion, their children are not allowed to have their adulthood, they're not allowed to enter into a temple, whereas men who do the same thing don't face those same challenges, and then also that women cannot become priests.
Well, the last item first. Men. Okay. The question is that how would you justify the equality of sexes in Zoroastrianism when you have obvious contradictions in the sense that women are not allowed to become priests, women are not allowed to enter a temple while they are in their monthly periods, and such other things. Right? That children, if they marry outside, they are not accepted as Zarathustrians. So the answer is this. The last part first. I have an answer for you, and the answer is Mobediyar Gulu Austin. Mobediyar Gulu Austin. We have a female Mobediyar, and I had the honor of training her and initiating her. So those concepts have changed. And if you would like to become a Mobediyar, we will be so proud of you. You will be able to serve your community. You will be able to do research and give us talk to people, and you'll be looked up as an outstanding citizen and an excellent Zarathustra. So that's the first part. You have the second part, of course, the children of women who are married outside Zoroastrianism. Well, in North America, we have moved on. We have moved on from the orthodoxies that our ancestors faced. There are any children of a Zoroastrian mother who is married to a non-Zoroastrian father. We do them no choice. We accept them as equal. No distinction. So we have moved on from that stage. With regard to your question about women entering the temple, that's a purity issue. Okay. So, in a certain, there is nobody there to check or to inspect when you go to a temple. It's your choice. You have to be truthful to yourself. If you believe that at that time you have certain changes to your body that is not suitable to go in a place of worship, you stay away. If you think otherwise, there's nobody at the gate to inspect you or ask you a question, or there's a questionnaire to be filled out. Having said that, I was told that there are certain manufacturing facilities. They're very sensitive, environmentally sensitive, or metally sensitive manufacturing facilities where the assemblers, if they are in their monthly period, are not allowed to touch that because it has some sort of an impact on it. Now, I'm no scientist, but that's what I was told. If that being the case, there's something to it that says while you are menstruating, there is something that goes on in your body which changes some magnetic field or whatever. And if that is the case, you make a choice whether you want to go in there or not. Does that answer your question? So did I miss out something?
Not quite. I mean, I was just really asking for your opinion.
Yes.
But specifically with regards to priests, as you mentioned, we have
Yes.
one female priest
Yes.
currently.
No, that was just an example. There are about 5 or so female priests are being trained as we speak in New York. There are other female priests. Iran, there are female priests. And traditionally in olden times, there were women priests. It's not that only men. Yeah, just give me 1 minute, let me finish. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
I really just was curious about your thoughts. And another more hypothetical question that I want your thoughts on. You mentioned also the genocide of Zoroastrians.
Yes.
That's largely rendered us a minority since. And so I wanted to ask your thoughts if we had remained a much larger community and we had more political power in the world, do you think that we would still maintain sort of the position and practice of nonviolence? Because I think that's easy to say when you're just such a small minority.
Absolutely right. I agree with you. During Sasanian times, who knew what happened? And we are humans just like anybody else. So when you are in power, you do whatever you like. It's when you're not in power, then when you realize, oh my God, I mean, these guys are doing something wrong. But when you're doing it, it feels normal. And you have the power of doing it with immunity. What would you do? Be under no illusion that they would not have done that. But then again, it does not mean that we should let that happen and not say something about it. We should. It's our responsibility that we should say something about it. It's not right. Right? And if you look at the genocide issue, if you look at what our ancestors went through, the prosecution, the genocides of today will be little kids in comparison to that. They were wiped out just because they worshipped what they thought was a different God. In fact, it was the same God. And they were killed for what? For practicing a different religion? Anyway, that's... Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, out of curiosity, just because, Zoroastrianism is definitely a religion of free choice, and one making the correct choice and everything like that. How do you apply that to current and definitely older views in regards to conversion, which is, a righteous choice in and of itself? Okay.
Well, as a Zoroastrian, when it comes to the question of conversion, I would say that we should start walking first before we talk about running a marathon. And this is what I mean. We have got bigger challenges now that are at the fundamental level, like this young lady pointed out. We have challenges of convincing people that a child of a Zoroastrian mother is equally as Zoroastrian as anybody else. We have to face those issues first, rather than running a marathon where we want to convert anybody that comes in. We have another choice and a challenge that we have to look at people who are returning Zarathustris, people who were converted by force, or their parents were converted by force. Now that they are living in relative freedom in North America or wherever, they come to us and say, well, look, this is my ancestors' religion. I didn't choose to get away from it, and I want to be back in it. That's what we need to look at first, before we go out to conversion. And those are important issues, and as a faith community, we are still struggling with it. We are trying to come to grips with it. It's so new. Right? If you are living in our country right now, and if you try to do that, perhaps 100 of your followers will be executed. Why? Because you converted one of theirs to yours. Right? So there are challenges. It's not that easy for anyone to just come in and we just accept them. Right? And if somebody walks in here and they want to be Zarathustri by choice, good luck. We will give you all the teachings of Zarathustra. Who is a Zarathustri? Who practices what Zarathustra has said? Not be calling him a Zarathustra. Who practices? If you practice what Zarathustra has taught you, you are a Zarathustri. You don't need anything else. That's it. Just 1 minute, I think the same way.
I just wanted to follow up on her question. In moving the needle a little bit, you
Yes.
talked about women's equality. So I congratulate you for having the women mobilians. So can we move the needle a little more and say, when do we get women mobiles?
Well, you have to be mindful that as it stands right now, the structure of initiating morbits is not in North America. We don't have it. We don't have that structure. We don't have that expertise. We don't have that the temples of that sort that would initiate a morbid. So we have to rely on the structures that are in existence back in India, back in Iran. And we have to abide by their rules. And if their rules dictate that, well, only men could be morbids, then men could be morbids. We don't have that option. Now, there is a move to have such a temple set up in Toronto. If that happens, things will change. Yes. Oh, this is
When you were discussing dualism, you framed it in the terms of good and evil.
yes.
And your example was the Islamic jihad.
Yes.
As I understand it, jihad has both the exterior and the interior meaning of waging war to expand the world of Islam and internal struggle against your own evils. Is that sort of dualism where it's like an esoteric versus an exoteric understanding of the struggle? Is there any precedence in Zoroastrian thought for the dualism in terms of internal versus external, esoteric versus exoteric?
Okay, so the Islamic Society of America, on its website, very clearly says, that the concept of jihad is your internal struggle. And it clearly says that it's not outside struggle. You are not to go out and kill a non-believer under the name of jihad. That's what they're saying. That's their interpretation. As far as Zoroastrian interpretation, I would perhaps agree with the Islamic Society of America's interpretation. Okay. Now, having said that, as this young lady pointed out, would those things would have been understood the same way during Sasanian times? We don't know. There are chances that it wasn't understood that way because at that time these people were in power. There's a possibility. Okay. So overall, it comes to an issue where it depends on where you are as a society, where you are as a faith. You would interpret these things from that angle. Okay. So to answer the question, I don't think there is any written or scriptural evidence that says that the fight against evil is to go out and be violent against others. Would that have been practiced? I don't know. It's a possibility, but I doubt it. But there's no answer to it. Yes.
Yeah. So I have a couple of comments. The comment you had about the manufacturing facilities.
Yes.
Those are called clean rooms. It's really anybody. It doesn't have to do with your gender. There are special conditions under which that you can enter a clean room. You have to have an outfit that you wear. You have to cover your hair. So I find it, because I have a scientific background, very difficult to believe that hundreds of years ago, they knew about electromagnetism, which is a recent finding, really, by physicists, that somehow, and even today, because you have some biological change in your body, you enter a clean room, it affects the quality of the product. So, so really, I don't think that would sit with me too well as someone with a scientific background. I think it's a myth. So I hate to, I just don't think, in this day and age, we can really,
Well,
scientifically
certainly.
speaking, I can't accept that, to be honest with you. Yeah. So, and then the other thing, I point to what the gentleman said here about jihad. Jihad, I grew up in Iran, okay? So, predominantly a Muslim country. Jihad is not necessarily always, and the way I was brought up, is associated with violence. I remember as a kid, the country had a program, Jihad Against Illiteracy. So I think it's been really, the meaning of it, it's really sort of like been misrepresented in the West, primarily because of certain elements in the Islamic society that are extremists. And there are more than 1 billion Muslims in this world. I don't practice Islam, so don't think that I'm defending. I'm just telling you that it's really been misrepresented. The word, it's been misused. Just the beautiful people. Okay? And then finally, going back to the dualism, the way I have learned, you may be familiar with Professor Tehemton, the way he talks about dualism in Zoroastrianism is not that you mentioned that everything, there's like a concept of dualism, so you have a good God and a bad God in it. Did I misunderstand you? Because what I've learned is that there's only one God, Ahura Mazda, and then you have the evil that frustrates basically Ashar, and then you have the good that promotes Ashar. So, because many people look at the teachings of Zarathustra as if there were two gods. That's not what I've learned.
That's it. The last point, yes, you're absolutely right. On the first point, you have a right to your opinion, but I think we should not underestimate our ancestors' knowledge about things. It's just unbelievable what they knew. And there is a possibility, now I'm not saying that that's what happened, but they may have known somehow. Anyway, you have a right to your opinion.
I don't think people knew about bacteriology. We have a doctor in this room. So I don't think, it's the same thing as that a Muslim priest would say, that if you touch this, because you're not a Muslim, you touch this vegetable. I mean, that's what they used to tell Zoroastrians not to come out in the street decades ago in Iran when it rained.
Yeah.
Okay? Somehow, because they're not, how in the world they knew about bacteriology then? I mean, you wash your hands and it's clean. I'm sorry, I can't accept that.
Yeah, maybe you're right, but then they had the concept of Taro, Niran. How did they come up with that?
They did not know about bacteriology.
Okay, maybe not.
No.
Let me
Okay, go
just
ahead.
jump
Yes.
in this because I have written on beauty and pollution.
Sure.
And yes, it's very clear that when ideas of beauty and pollution developed, they developed out of fears of boundaries of, the basic notion was that there are things inside the body and things outside the body. And the body is a boundary.
Sure.
And so blood inside the body does good. Blood outside the body can be somehow misused by evil spirits, etc. So it is what we would now call superstition, but rather than medicine. But it becomes a driving force. So whether it is a notion of of the Islamic wudu, whether it is the padyab, the notion that you present yourself to the divinity in a clean fashion,
Okay.
both physically and spiritually, but not any notion of bacteriology.
Yes.
About jihad, the Arabic word jihad means religious struggle.
Yes.
So that it can be an internal religious struggle, it can be an external struggle, as you pointed out. It can be a jihad to plant trees, it can be a jihad for education, it can also be a jihad to fight non-believers. And so you get the entire range of it,
Yes.
and you get different individuals practicing it in different ways. The problem, of course, is that we are now at a place and time where the word is used in a very violent way. Now, interestingly, when we look at the Islamic conquest, the Arab conquest of Iran, and then the Islamization of Iran,
Yes.
I would argue that the very worst time for Zoroastrians was not at the point of the Arab conquest. It was at the Safavid conversion of Iran from
absolutely.
Sunnism to Shiism,
Yeah.
because the Safavids forcefully converted the entirety of Sunni Iran to Shiism and then decimated all the minorities. The first conversion did occur, but it took a long time. The Arabs' conquest of Iran is essentially finished in the early 700s. When you look statistically, Iran is 90% Muslim only by about 1300. So it's a very long conversion process. Multiple factors, economic factors, true belief, and even persecution. There's a range of factors involved. The real tough times, I think the times that actually almost distort the historical memory, particularly for Iranian Zoroastrians, is the more recent memories that they have heard of Safavid Qajar persecutions, which were tremendous. But that's a different period, as opposed to the Arab conquest and the battles. And what we often forget is that the Safavid conversion first converted Iran at that point was Sunni.
Yeah.
It converted to Shiism first, but then then it went after the three minorities at that time.
So when is that?
That is 1600. Shah Ismail takes over in 1601. 1601. By that time, so after about 1300, Iran is Sunni Muslim, not Shia. And there are small Shia groups, the Buyids, the Ismailis. There were smaller groups at different points. Some of them had little power here and there. It's only with the Safavids who conquer the whole of Iran, Shah Ismail I, that you have this major push to Shiism. So then right at the end of Safavid times, in fact, there's an attempt, there was a mullah Bashi, a chief mullah, Muhammad Bakir Majlisi.
Majlisi, prior to him, they had Karaki.
Yes,
They
exactly.
Imported,
Right.
They actually imported
Correct.
Shiite clergy from Lebanon.
Right, which
Yes.
is something to,
The
this is a
head
good
of them
point.
was Karaki.
Yeah, because there weren't enough Shia clergy in Iran. They imported them from Kashmir, which is why Khomeini's family came from Kashmir. They got them from Bahrain, which is why you still have a very large majority of Bahrain is still Shia. From Lebanon, from southern Iraq, Najaf, Karbala, those areas. And so a lot of what we think of now is that subsequent persecution, and that was very bad.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you so much.
Going back to the question of being a morbid, we were always told that you can be a morbid if your immediate parents or your grandparents or your father or your grandfather was a morbid, and if they were not, then you cannot become a morbid. Any comments on that?
That's changing. That's changing very quickly. See, you have to realize that during that time of King Jamshid, this is pre-Zarathustra, they separated the society in 4 parts. Not only Zoroastrians or pre-Zoroastrian, but Hinduism had the same thing, right? You had Atravan, Rateshtar, Vastrya, Sudoksh, 4 classes of people. Their division of labor in those days. I would argue that these guys were pretty smart. They knew what they were doing. So they had this priest, and that sector's job was to be priest. Then the warriors. You go to war. We don't want to send our priest to war. You go to war. And then Vastryoks, the farmers, and those the tradespeople. So that's how society operated for years. Eventually, the last three somehow mingled and combined, and they became one. But for some reason, the priests remained. So therefore, the tradition of priests from the priest family only. But then what happened? It was my grandfather's generation looked at the scenario and they said, oh, what's going on here? This priest, you only study about your religion, you practice here, etc. They were poor, they didn't have enough resources, etc. Whereas the other guys, they would go out to university, they would be prosperous, and then they look at these kids and say, hey, you are this illiterate guy, just a morbid. So they decided, no, this is not good enough. You go out and study. You go out in the secular world and be whatever you like to be. And that's what we started doing. My family for generations were Mobids, priests. I'm not a practicing priest anymore. I do a little bit, but not. I don't live in a place of worship, etc. So if I go and do something else, it's only reasonable that the guy who is not from a priestly family should have every right to be a priest, if he so desires, if he goes through the process, if he has the inclination, if he has the commitment to serve the community, why not? Right? So it's changing very fast. Yes?
Just wondered if the time delay to become a priest, if you weren't in that original group, might have had something to do with the fact that the priests, the Magi originally were a different ethnic group from the rest of the Zoroastrians.
That's very likely. So, and also I think when you talk about priest, the priests of 100 years ago are very different than the priests of today. Priests of 100 years ago were very different. Their lifestyle was different. Their training was different. Their commitment was different. In fact, to be a priest in those days was a responsibility. My ancestors had to take the holy fire and run, live in mountains for 12 years in borrowed caves. Why? They didn't choose to do that, but that was their responsibility. So they were responsible to do it, and therefore they did it. The priests were killed. Just because they were priests, they had memorized all those gathas and things like that. So when there were executions, who would they kill? If you want to destroy their books, the books were right here, and the priests were killed. So it wasn't like to be a priest was an advantage. Of course it was an advantage, but that wasn't the advantage. They were being prosecuted, they were being killed. Yet they did it because that was their duty. It was their sense of commitment to their religion. And therefore they had this whole section of population, they were devoted to this task. Right? So now as a training for a priest, the young kid, when he's growing up in a priest family, the kid knows what's going on. My dad gets up at 5 o'clock to tend to the fire. My mom does this. It's a way of life. To bring in an outsider to live that way of life, it's very difficult because they've never seen it. They have no concept of it. Now, that is the priest of 100 years ago. Priest of today, at least in North American setting, is very different. Priest of today is just like me, an ordinary guy who does his own job. Weekends, evenings, you go to the service. So now anyone can do it because you don't need to be in that upbringing, in that way of life that you needed to be a priest 100 years ago. It's the concept has changed. Yes.
I just wanted to make a point regarding the gentleman from like 10 comments ago about the conversions. Like it's like I think it's a more recent thing that like Zoroastrians are not supposed to convert, because like if you think about it, we wouldn't be a religion if we didn't convert anybody.
Yeah.
And like Zarathustra was like the original converter, and he actively went around converting and preaching his beliefs and the teachings of Aura Mazda to people and converting them into Zoroastrianism. So it seems a little bit ironic that like we're like now we're like saying, oh, like, you have to be pure, you can't convert into Zoroastrian and be of like a different blood.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of the history of it in regards to, you know, there's a long history of Zoroastrianism being a missionary faith. I mean, it's mentioned by Zoroaster, so
Yeah.
how else did he spread it?
Exactly.
But I know that the sort of anti-conversion viewpoints definitely did come from the idea, especially, you know, with mopeds in India and the like, needing to maintain a sense of community against, well, against their Hindu hosts, in a sense. You know, very likely that the princes and kings and whatever that they lived under prescribed to them that they could say that they didn't convert.
Right.
That's a fact, that's a
Yeah,
fact.
yes, and so if, you know, I know why it is that way. It's just maintained as a sort of thing, a sort of fear in a sense.
Right.
But, you know, from personal opinion, I don't think it needs to remain that way anymore. But, you know, I can definitely understand where it comes from and why. You know, it's a preservation of culture, society, and one's history.
And there are reasons for that.
Yeah.
More like a
This-
promise, I think, given to the,
Yeah.
that's what,
Yeah, historical promise. Yeah.
This young
Yeah,
man.
so going back to your point, again, see, like, before 1979 in Iran, you could become a Zoroastrian in Iran because Iran more or less had a secular form of government, so you weren't persecuted if you changed your religion, and also the Zoroastrian community was not under pressure. Now, after 79 in Iran, that changed. If you're not a Zoroastrian, actually in Tehran, they're afraid to even let you inside Atashkade in Tehran.
Yeah.
Because they can actually get in trouble with the government, right? So it's not, all of it is not because of the Zoroastrian community itself, it has to do with the political atmosphere.
Absolutely.
Under which they, you know, they live. So just.
Yeah.
This lady.
It's to go off what the last few comments have been, we also have to remember that we are talking about Zarathustra's teachings for other religions, but after we left what was Persia, we have slowly taken on other religions, customs and everything, and I think a lot of the inequality for women comes from some of that, especially as far as the menstruation cycles go. I still know people in India who are practicing Hindus, Orthodox Hindus, who are not allowed into the kitchen during their menstruation cycles
Absolutely.
in today's day and age. And I have a feeling that a lot of that was, maybe it was already being practiced, I don't know, but I have a feeling a lot of that was not forced onto us, but it sort of became part of our culture. And that's something that we will have to break worldwide religion, encompassing all religions, not just us. I think that's something that everyone will have to do, like the women being allowed to drive in 2017 and 2018.
Yes, well, that's true, and that's very likely because now, as I mentioned, Hinduism has an impact on Zoroastrianism. You can't deny it, and it's bound to happen if you're going to live in a minority situation, in a majority certain faith community, particularly with Hindu community, which is very peaceful and very accommodating and very open. Would you not accept some of their customs and practices? Of course you would. You live with them for 1,000 years, right? And it's a miracle that we still survived in spite of all that. So of course, yes, you are absolutely right. That could very well be. And there are temples, Hindu temples, where women are not allowed during their monthly period. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohammed Mirza. That was a very good presentation. Arya, I have a little thing to tell you.
Sure.
Modern bacteriology has been around for about 250 years. But I can tell you that our ancestors knew a lot what we don't know today. I'll give an example. In Vedic times, Brahmin priests would go from village to village ahead of the smallpox epidemic, carrying a small vial of a serum, where they would actually make a little knife cut on the person's hand and put a drop of serum over there. They were actually, in Vedic times, inoculating the population against a smallpox epidemic. So they had the knowledge, but we think that we discovered the circulation of blood, that William Harvey discovered the circulation of blood. No. Sushruta Samhita, 3,000 years ago, has already talked about it. He's even talked about caesarean birth, and he's talked about forceps extractions. And forceps actually are found in Egypt, in tombs that go back 2,500, 3,000 years ago. So there's a lot of knowledge that was existent then, which probably got lost in between, and now it's come back to us now. So
Okay.
just keep that in mind, because thank you.
No problem.
Okay, we always save the best for last. Our last speaker is Dr. Lauji Kama. He's come from New Jersey, and he has a BSc and a BSc Technology degree from the University of Bombay, and he's a doctorate in chemistry from the Columbia University in New York. He has worked as a research scientist at Merck and Company and is now retired. Lauji is a founding member of ZAGNI, which is the Zoroastrian Association of Greater New York, and has been instrumental in defining the parameters of ZAGNI's constitution. He was its first secretary and subsequently the president and the longest serving trustee of the Darbe Mehr, 26 years. Lauji's great passion is the youth of the community. He has run the religion classes at ZAGNI since inception in 1974, and youth camps for 15 years, and worked on the Good Life book. He is presently the chair of the Religious Education Committee of Fezana. He was instrumental in bringing about the cooperative spirit between IZA, that's the Iranian Zoroastrian Association, and ZAGNI, by reorganizing the constitution of the Darbe Mehr. So now there are two associations, IZA and ZAGNI, who share one place of worship. He has lectured on subjects on Zoroastrianism in North America, UK and India, and has contributed to the textbook Good Life. Dr. Lauji Kama.